What's up guys, I'm Phoenix Master 1 and welcome to my refined review and builds guide for the Choose Your Legends 5 Refine featuring Brave Gatekeeper, Brave Marianne, Eirika and Marth. So let's take a look at Gatekeeper first because he definitely needed a weapon refine, and this weapon refine doubles down on a support and makes him a lot more tankier. So this is a pretty great weapon refine honestly, and this weapon did give him +3 defense, and he can also inflict -6 attack and resistance on the foe in the combat. And now with this weapon refine, he's actually able to give +5 to all stats of the allies in 3 rows and 3 columns centered on him. And they can also heal up 7 HP after their combat. So this is kind of reminiscent of Saline and also Silk in a way. So if you have used any of those units, then you know how useful, after combat healing is on many of the tanks, Omni tanks, God Sword, Save tanks, because a lot of times you're not able to have that healing special or healer on your team, and this kind of post-combat healing is amazing on any kind of tank. So Gatekeeper being able to provide the extra stats and the healing, in my opinion, is really good, and his range is actually pretty huge. So he can be in the backline supporting, and he can stack up even more support on your tanks, which is really amazing. Now keep in mind this is the in-combat support, so it is going to be completely negated by Emblem's feud status, which you can spread. I really love what they did with the support aspect of his weapon refine, and then in the combat, he's also able to get effects depending on the number of allies in that 3 rows and 3 columns centered on him. So it's a pretty big range, and you're able to debuff the opponent's attack and resistance depending on the allies in the area ×3, and this can go all the way up to 9. So he can shred opponent's attack and resistance up to -15 with this weapon, which is definitely pretty good for being tanky and also hitting a bit hard, which is something that Gatekeeper has always lacked, which is just nuking, and this at least makes it a bit better. And then if you have 2 or more allies in that area, then you're able to get guard on the foe, which is really useful for a slow mage like him. And finally, if you've got 3 or more allies in that area, then you're able to get follow-up negation. So that is again helpful for a slower unit like him, but obviously against any kind of null follow-up enemy, this is going to be getting negated. And any kind of breakable structure within 2 spaces of him that can be broken by the enemy is counted as 3 allies, and that is actually pretty important for Aether Raids defense. He also gets true and flat damage reduction based on 20% of his defense. So this is something that we have seen on Brave Dimitri, on Duo Asker, and so many of the other units. So this is the unpierceable damage reduction, which is not really affected by Special Spiral 4, Deadeye, Lethality, stuff like that. So Gatekeeper's defense is actually pretty high for a mage with a super boon. So he's definitely going to be quite tanky with this kind of flat damage reduction. The unfortunate thing is that he's not able to stack this up with the regular damage reduction, and that's where this kind of true or flat damage reduction is really good, because it is going to be getting applied after the regular damage reduction. But unfortunately, Gatekeeper does not really have easy access to that. And then finally, he's able to heal himself up for 7 HP after the combat. So this kind of healing is really nice for a bulky unit. And overall, I think that Gatekeeper has got a pretty nice weapon refine that allows him to function as a top tier support unit in Aether Raids offense, and also function really well in Aether Raids defense. Now the reason being is that having the healing and the extra stats is really good. Before this, the only reason people use Gatekeeper is for his detail report slot B skill, which allowed him to block any kind of warping within 4 spaces of him. So that was really helpful against the battle catcher teams, guidance for and stuff like that. But it was not really enough in my opinion when it comes to the support, and now he's just so much better with the support, just supporting any kind of Omni tank or Save tank with the healing, and also providing them +5 to all of their stats, and then functioning as a pretty tanky unit who can be useful for sponging hits from the leftover enemy so that he can get to the pots, which I think is really useful in Aether Raids offense. So his bulk could be really helpful in getting to the pots, just stalling the enemy. And in Aether Raids defense, he can be a lot more bulky and just be a lot more annoying, which is really helpful because if you're trying to block any kind of player face shenanigans and Gale Force teams, and forcing them to use more actions to kill your team if your team is really bulky is definitely really helpful. Unfortunately, he is a bit lacking when it comes to the firepower despite the resistance debuff that he can get, because he doesn't really get any kind of true damage or even like a guaranteed follow-up attack at the bare minimum. So he's not really going to be nuking too hard, but he's definitely going to be tanking. So for the most part, he's going to be used for his support, and then his bulk is going to be coming into the play for just being annoying or just getting to the pots. And in Summoner Duels, he's also really useful because Guidance 4 is everywhere in that game mode. There's a lot of warping, so he can be a lot more useful there. But again, the lack of firepower is what can kind of hold him back in Summoner Duels, because it's a very trade heavy metagame where you need to get the kills with your units and trade against the enemies. And there having like a more of a supportive unit is not the best, even though he can block the warping, which is actually really insane. But still he can be useful in Winter Cordelia and like Bridal Catcher teams so that he can at least get the brave hits, which is going to be making him a bit more threatening in the player phase. Now, Summoner Duels is a crazy metagame and not a lot of people play that. A lot more people play Aether Raids, and there I think Gatekeeper is really good. Like I said, with the support and also in Aether Raids defense and in any kind of in-game content, he's going to be really helpful with the healing. So he's much better now, which is really good because he depended way too much on his slot B skill, and now his weapon actually gives you some kind of supportive effect. And even though this is not the most insane support, keep in mind this is simple but really effective support for any kind of tank. And on top of that, he also has the support from his slot B skill. So blocking the warping is, one of the things which only 2 units in this game can do. One of them is In Front of Your Eyes and the other one is Legendary Mir. And Legendary Mir doesn't exactly provide this kind of healing and extra stats. So Gatekeeper does have that unique supportive effect, which I think is going to be aging pretty nicely. And I think we're going to be seeing him quite a lot in Aether Raids. And even though I do think that Brave Marianne overall has the best refine out of this batch, I think Gatekeeper is going to be the unit that we see the most out of the Choose Your Legends 5 batch after this weapon refine going forward, because his support is honestly so good and a lot of people are really used to tanking with their teams and using safe tanks. And Gatekeeper goes really well with that playstyle, not only blocking the warping but also giving the healing and the extra stats. Generally, the warping that we see in Fae is associated with like Guidance 4, Soaring Guidance, or with like Bridal Catria or Winter Cordelia, but keep in mind that Chart Status, which Legend Hinoka can give out, is also kind of warping. So it can be helpful against many of the Legend Hinoka teams in Summoner Duels or in Aether Raids defense, because you can stop the movement and basically stop their warping. So that is also something that Gatekeeper can actually do. Now that we have Chart Status being available a lot more than it was used to be before. And again, this can work in Aether Raids defense because Summer Edelgard and Legendary Edelgard are one of the most popular options when it comes to Gale Forcing in player phase. So it can be a pretty annoying thing for them because they're just stuck with one movement and they're not really able to utilize Assault Troop. Gatekeeper honestly doesn't really need too many expensive skills to function because at the end of the day, he is more of a support unit. So you can just run like 2 drives and a Slot C and Sacred Seal and you should be fine even on a budget. I do like plus defense IV a lot more on him than plus attack IV because it's a super boon and it also helps him with the flat damage reduction, and being more tanky can always be helpful in getting to the pots in something like Aether Raids or just for holding the line. So this kind of build can be used in any kind of game mode, and you can also use them in Aether Raids offense for mainly providing the infantry pulse support. So you can run double HP on Slot A and Sacred Seal and basically provide the infantry pulse support, which may be really important for any kind of unit to charge up their Vital Astra or like Godlike Reflexes or any kind of other special. So this could be helpful for those kinds of infantry units. But if you're trying to go the full supportive route, then Canto Control is overall the best Slot C skill that you can run on him for something like Aether Raids defense or Summoner Duels. Now for Aether Raids defense, I think that Canto Control just even more triples down on that kind of support. And Attack Defense Unity is really good as a Slot A skill for him because not only it goes really well if you run him with like Legendary Male Robin, but even outside of that, just dealing with the debuffs to his attack and defense is helpful. And he does get the flat damage reduction on his defense, so he's going to be protected against the debuffs from that. And then you can also run attack defense form just so that he can get more attack and defense. This is the main competitive build that we're going to be seeing on Gatekeeper. You can also use him in Aether Raids offense with attack defense ideal for in his Slot A. And keep in mind that in the light season, you have to watch out for Embla because she can just negate the in-combat support that Gatekeeper provides because she can inflict the feud status. So again, in the Astra season, it's going to be a lot easier, but still against many of the Catria balls in the light season, sometimes they only use, Embla and they just rely on Medius as their mythic. And even if they have Embla, it's not that hard to position your units in a way that they do not really get hit by the feud status. So he can work in both seasons, but it is going to be a bit easier in the Astra season. And you can run him with Infantry Null Follow-Up for supporting some kind of Omni Tank or any kind of Infantry God Sword. So Drive Speed and Infantry Null Follow-Up are going to be really helpful with the extra stats that you provide. And then you can also use him with Crossbar Attack and Distant Guard as the supportive options for supporting like your safe tanks. And you can also run Fortress Defense Res in a Slot A so that he can soak the Dark Shrine away from your safe tank. So if you don't really have like the Unity skills or Legendary Male Robin on your team, then driving away the Dark Shrine debuffs from your tanks and safe tanks is actually really helpful, and that's something that Gatekeeper can also do with his defensive stats. Like I said before, Gatekeeper doesn't really need much investment to function as a support unit, but if you're a big Gatekeeper fan and if you've invested heavily into him, then he can definitely function as a tank in the enemy phase with his true damage reduction. So you can run his Close Reversal, which is his default slotty skill, and Panic Smoke 4, and Panic Smoke 4 can just help you tank even better, and unfortunately you'll have to run Quick Post in the Sacred Seal to double in the enemy phase, which is a bit unfortunate in 2023, but still, you can get the healing out of Flare and his weapon to stay in the range of it, and you can also run him with good allies like Brave Male Robin, Na, or Legendary Hinoka that can provide him some kind of special support, because he will need some kind of support to function as a tank, because he doesn't really have -1 special cooldown in his weapon, and he doesn't really get any kind of like extra nuking power from his weapon. So getting his specials off is going to be the main way of doing a lot of damage, and in that case his allies can definitely help him. And if you want to tank more of the ranged enemies, then Attack Defense Finish 4 can be his best slotty skill, because it provides him with even more healing and gives him that extra defense. And Time Pulse 4 can be run so that Bonfire becomes a 2 cooldown special, and then if you use him with like Na or like Brave Male Robin, then you can immediately retaliate with Bonfire, which is going to be doing a lot of damage, and it's also going to be healing you up at the same time. Brave Marianne, in my opinion, gets the best weapon refine out of this Choose Your Legends patch because of boosting her performance to a much higher level than all of the other weapon refines that we've got in this patch, and also almost giving her everything that she wanted in their weapon refine. So now with this refine, she has got -1 special cooldown along with speed +3 in her weapon. So this is going to be making Requiem Dance into a 2 cooldown special, and having -1 special cooldown is really standard nowadays, so I'm glad that she has got this now, and she does have the -6 cloud speed resistance against the foe in the combat, so she's going to be ignoring any kind of visible buff of opponent speed and resistance, and then she can get damage reduction on foe's first attack depending on whatever phase she is in. So if she's going to be attacking in the player phase, then she's going to be getting 80% damage reduction. So she gets a bit of bump in terms of the damage reduction by 10% for that, and now she can also get the damage reduction in the enemy phase by 30%. And this kind of damage reduction in the enemy phase is actually pretty useful if you use her in Aether Raids offense in like a Gale Force team, because you can usually bait out the melee dancers with Brave Marianne, and now with this damage reduction she has much higher chance of surviving the leftover units so that you can collect the pots. And obviously having more damage reduction is better, because now she is almost always going to be surviving her player phase unless the opponent has some kind of damage reduction piercing. She also gets +5 to all of her stats with the weapon refine, and also true damage based on 20% of her speed. And getting true damage is really good because she doesn't really do any kind of damage with Requiem Dance, so any kind of true damage and extra damage is always welcome on any kind of nuke. And then finally, she can have foes percentage based damage reduction skills like Close Call, Dragon Wall by 50%. So this is pretty much the damage reduction shredding that we have seen on Bramimond, and also with Magical Null follow-up. And then she also has the Null Guard effect, or the offensive tempo effect, which allows her to bypass the guard skills of the enemies, which is extremely good for triggering any kind of specials, including her Requiem Dance. So she has a lot of value in Aether Raids offense in my eyes, because she is a 2-action pseudo dancer. Basically, in Aether Raids offense, having more actions on a Gale Force team is always going to be helpful, because then you can trap your opponents or get to the pods, and that is always going to be helpful. So when Marianne can attack and also refresh a unit with her Requiem Dance, and even though she's going to be inflicting the gravity status on the refreshed ally, it is still really good, because having 2 actions on a unit is always amazing, as you have seen with Edelgards, with Legendary Leaf, Cyan Leaf, Brave Gulvik, any of those units. So she can be the 2-for-1 dancer, which is really good, and a lot of times she is the only magical source of damage for a Gale Force team. And shredding through the damage reduction is extremely good on a Gale Force team, because there can be really annoying far-save tanks or tanks in general with a lot of damage reduction, so she can just come in and take care of the damage reduction, do a lot of damage as a nuke, also survive with her damage reduction. So I've used Brave Marianne a lot ever since her release, and this is an amazing weapon refine that makes her really good in Aether Raids offense, and actually also really amazing outside of Aether Raids offense in like Aether Raids defense or Summoner Duels or any kind of game mode, because Marianne can let go of her Requiem Dance and just run a damaging special and actually function like a really good nuke, because her offenses are not the worst, and she's got a really cracked weapon refine, having the tempo effect, having the damage reduction halving, and also just having, you know, that kind of damage reduction, which makes her survival a lot easier. So overall, Brave Marianne expands her viability beyond like just the Aether Raids offense Gale Force Dancer, and now she can also function as a nuke with other specials, which is a big win for Brave Marianne fans if you want to use her like in other game modes. And functioning as a nuke who can pierce through the damage reduction and also have the null guard at the same time while having high survivability is really good. So if you're going to be building up Brave Marianne on a budget, then I think her base kit is fine. You can just keep attack speed unity because it has aged pretty well with all of the debuffs going around and with Legendary Male Robin. So I still think that it is the best slotty skill for her. So you can just run Blade Session and function in the player phase. And if you're going to be giving her any kind of expensive skill, then I think Magical Null Follow-Up is by far the best option you can give her, because the damage reduction shredding actually stacks up with her weapon, just like it does for Bramimond and Young Soren. So you can shred through 75% of foes' damage reduction by having Magical Null Follow-Up stack up with her weapon, which is extremely good because you're not going to be depending on your special like Special Spiral 4. So this can be helpful in many of the matchups because you're cutting through a lot of damage reduction of the enemies per hit, which is extremely good. And you can also have Time Pulse 4, I guess, if you fodder off Brave Sorin to her, but Time Pulse 4 is not the biggest upgrade with Requiem Dance. Still, I guess you could have that, and you can just run Blade Session to get even more offenses. And then she could be run in Aether Raids offense as a Wings of Mercy unit, which has been her bread and butter. And you can just run Null Follow-Up Sacred Seal because that is something she lacks. So you can just use her with Time Pulse if you're not using her with like Asker or Garrick. And if you're using her with those kinds of units, then she can actually just run Infantry Pulse and support the Mythics who are not going to be having as much of the HP. So you can just pulse them down, so that's also an option. And if at any point we get a Wings of Mercy Sacred Seal, then she can actually run Magical Null Follow-Up Inner Slot B skill and function even better on Wings of Mercy Gale Force teams. So if you've seen my Aether Raids offense videos, then you know how Brave Marianne can function extremely well with Gale Force teams, and especially in the Chaos season where you're only allowed to have one dancer per team. So being a pseudo dancer with Requiem Dance is really good with that. Requiem Dance is something that makes Brave Marianne even more unique, but keep in mind you can actually let go of Requiem Dance for a damaging special like Flare, and Brave Sorin is the perfect fodder for her, providing her with Magical Null Follow-Up, Time Pulse 4, and Flare at the same time. So you can just run a damaging special after her weapon refine because she can function as a really solid nuke and actually function in Aether Raids defense and even in Summoner Duels. And she can even be used outside of these game modes just as a nuke because that weapon refine is just that good, and stacking up the Magical Null Follow-Up with her weapon refine provides her with amazing nuking potential with her offensive stat spread and everything that she has got. So it can absolutely be worth it, especially in something like an Anima Katria Ball where we don't really have Bramimond as the mythic. So she can function like the Anima Bramimond basically by cutting through that damage reduction and having that damage reduction in her weapon herself. So she's going to be a pretty potent nuke there, and again with any kind of Rattle Catcher team she's going to be functioning really well because she can quad attack and trigger Flare on her double attack or her Brave Hit with Time Pulse 4, and that is going to be doing a lot of damage and also going to be providing her with the healing. Now this can be done with lower merges and lower investment, but more merges are always going to be helpful. And you can also ascend her attack asset if you're going to be spending a Floret on her because it does have a super boon. But for her best IV, I think speed is still the best because doubling is extremely important, and Marianne does need to be fast to double many of the opponents. And then you can also run Ruptured Sky with attack speed Oath 4 if you don't really want to run Flare, and if you want to have more offenses with attack speed Oath 4 and also the teleportation. So that is also an option that you can run now after Weapon Refine because Ruptured Sky is a 1 cooldown special which you can easily trigger on her double. And finally, if you're a big Marianne fan and if you want to use her in Aether Raids offense with like the most decked out build, then I guess you can go with Wings of Mercy 4, and attack speed unity still on such a max investment build just goes to show you that it is still really good. And attack speed pledge is something you can run for getting extra offenses while also getting these special charges and making use of Requiem Dance without Time Pulse. Brave Eirika was the strongest Choose Your Legends 5 unit back when the Choose Your Legends came out, and she actually gets a pretty nice weapon refine. It's not the most insane, but still it does address one of her weaknesses, which she had building up. So with Binding Regan Leaf, she was always able to get the -1 special cooldown and have the effective damage against cavalry and armor units, so she made for a pretty amazing armor buster, and she still is a really good armor buster. And with that effective damage against cavalry units, it is going to be helping you against many of the cavalry threats that do have damage reduction nowadays. With the weapon refine, she's able to get plus 10 to all of her stats in the combat now, and she also gets her damage reduction bumped to 40% on foe's first attack. And this is actually in both phases along with null follow-up. So she now has the full null follow-up, which is extremely good for the enemy phase in case she wants to survive something. And then finally, she pretty much has a tier 4 version of lull attack speed and defense built in her weapon refine. By this, I pretty much mean that she can debuff the opponent's attack speed and defense by 5 at the minimum, and then she can debuff them even more up to like -9 depending on the total visible bonus status that is on them. So if they have null follow-up status or like resonant blade, shields, any of those bonus status effects, then she's going to be able to just get even more debuffs on them, which is going to be helping her function much better as an offensive threat and also actually take less damage. And then she also has the dull attack speed defense in the combat. So this pretty much ignores any kind of visible buffs of the opponent on their attack speed and defense. So that is really helpful in functioning as a melee nuke. Now there are some insane melee nukes like Summer Female Chez, Tea Time Ira, and Spring Carla that are essentially like delete buttons. And even though Brave Eirika is not at the very top of the food chain when it comes to melee nuke cavaliers, I think this weapon refine is still a lot better than what it looks on surface, because one of her weaknesses was basically speed creep. So things were getting a lot faster and she was just not able to double them, and that is the case with a lot of older units. So with this weapon refine, she's actually able to be a lot faster and double a lot of threats, even modern threats, and god swords, which is really helpful in functioning as a melee nuke. And her other weakness is damage reduction. Unfortunately, she didn't really get any kind of damage reduction piercing, which a lot of Brave Eirika fans wanted, but having used Brave Eirika so much ever since her launch, I can definitely tell you that this is not the worst weapon refine, even though it might seem like it doesn't really give too much, but still having the extra stats, which she really needed, especially like the speed, is really helpful in just outspeeding the opponents and killing them, and still she can function as a pretty amazing nuke. It's just that we have some insane standards set by many of the melee cavaliers that we have seen in the last couple of months. So if you're going to be building up Brave Eirika on a budget, you can still use her base kit, and I think this can work out in like Aether Raids, in-game content, anything. And this is going to be still really strong with Moonlight Bangle, giving her that true damage, Canto 2, and also the Null Guard effect. So Moonlight Bangle is still really amazing with her weapon refine, and her weapon refine does make her a lot faster, so she's going to be able to double more things. And because now she can function also in the enemy phase, you can just run attack speed catch as well if you want to function there, or blade session is also an option if you want to just maximize your offenses. And if you're going to be having a more mixed phase option for your Slaughter instead of Surge Sparrow, then you can just run attack speed catch 4, and this is really easy to get from the divine codes. And I still think that the plus speed IV is the best IV for her, because obviously as a melee nuke, you need to outspeed the opponents, and speed is, you know, one of the most insane things to keep up with. So having the speed IV is the best boon, and then you can also ascend her attack IV for having more damage output. You can also run her with an AoE special, and this is something that has been really useful to me in Aether Raids offense and also in Summoner Duels. So she can do a lot of damage with her AoE special, and unfortunately it is not the easiest to charge up the AoE special with her, but nowadays we have got a lot of, you know, special charging support that you can run, like Duo Asker for example for Summoner Duels, that can make it a lot easier for you to pre-charge, you know, these kinds of high cooldown AoE specials. So Brave Eirika can certainly function with that, and you can also run attack speed clash in her Slaughter as a high investment or max investment option, which can give her the attack and speed debuff neutralization. And Luna is going to be giving her some great damage output with Moonlight Bangle, so it is still a pretty good special that you can run. But you can always run Ruptured Sky, especially for the more competitive aspects of like Aether Raids offense or Summoner Duels, because you can essentially pre-charge Ruptured Sky with something like Asker on your team, or do a Crom and basically trigger 2 Ruptured Sky in a single round of combat. And Ruptured Sky can really help you in many matchups, because a lot of frontliners like in Aether Raids offense might be Medias, Freyr that are Beast and Dragon units. So the boosted damage from Ruptured Sky really helps. And you can also run Flared Sparrow, which is a new tool in the arsenal of Brave Eirika, which allows you to have the Flame Terrain activated, which can be really helpful for hit and run along with her Canto 2. So that is something you can run. And Colorless Feud is really good option in competitive game modes, because Fallen Maria is everywhere, so just ignoring her drive Life Unending is really helpful for any kind of nuke. So it works out both in Summoner Duels and also in Aether Raids offense if you have a Brave Gulvik to spare. And if you want to have something that can function in both phases at like absolute max investment, then Attack Speed Prime 4 is the skill for you, because it allows you to get extra offenses and also the distant counter effect. So that is going to be really good with Speed Smoke 4 stacking up with the damage reduction that you can get. And this is definitely not something you can run at lower investment, because you need the extra stats for her to function with this kind of mixed phase build, and especially with distant counter. So it can be a fun build that you can run at this kind of max investment if you have the fodder and if Eirika is your favorite unit. You can get the dot status from Speed Smoke 4, which does add towards the status effects that you need to get the distant counter out of Attack Speed Prime. And obviously you can just give her some support from like Asker, Peony, stuff like that, and have the extra status effects on her so that she can get the distant counter out of this slotty skill. Brave Marth gets a pretty decent weapon refine that allows him to function as a much better Omni Tank, God Sword, and also a Vantage sweeper. So he did have -1 special cooldown, which made Shining Emblem into a 1 cooldown special, and effective damage against dragons always helps with the increasing meta dragons. And now with this weapon refine, he's able to get +10 to all of his stats in the combat, and unfortunately he doesn't really get any kind of lenient conditions to his other effects, so it is still going to be counting the total buffs on the allies in 3 spaces for giving him the extra effects in combat. So if this value is 10 or more, then he's going to be able to get full null follow up, and now he can also get the null guard effect. So getting the null guard effect is actually really helpful in the player phase, because if you pre-charge Shining Emblem with something like Time Pulse, then you can actually trigger it twice in a single round of combat against a unit that can retaliate back against you. And this is going to be helping against many of the bulky threats. And the tempo skill actually helps a lot with the godlike reflexes builds that you may have gotten from the Hall of Forms. So the tempo is a really welcome addition to Marth's arsenal. And then if the value of total buffs is more than equal to 25, then he's able to get extra 5 attack in the combat, and now he can heal up 7 HP per hit, which is good for the self-sustain, and also just good for, equalizing something like the chip damage from distant pressure. And finally, if the buff value is 60 or more, then he's able to get the Vantage effect, which is going to be making him unique, because there is Fallen Female Violet, but she needs her speed to have that Vantage effect, whereas Brave Marth just needs to have these buffs instead of having the speed. So it is still going to be making him a unique God Sword in that aspect. And then he's able to get extra stats in combat, depending on the highest buffs to each of the stat among the unit and the allies in 3 spaces. So this is like a ally bonus doubler effect that we have seen a bunch of times before, like on Garrick and on like Legendary Roy's remix. So this is good for having more stats on Marth. And then finally he's able to get 40% damage reduction on foes' first attack, including the Brave hits. So this means that on the first and the second hit of the Brave attacks, he's going to be able to have the 40% damage reduction, which is extremely helpful against many of the Bridal Catria and Winter Cordelia teams as a failsafe if you do fail to kill with Vantage, or if they have Hardy Bearing. So having this damage reduction in his weapon does allow him to stack up even more damage reduction with his base kit, or just choose like other options for his slot B. So this is really good, and even though this is not the most insane weapon refine, it is still an upgrade for Brave Marth, and it's honestly impressive how he has still stayed relevant with the Vantage effect and all of the effects in his weapon, even to this day, with the insane competition that we have with the God Swords. And obviously he's not like the top God Sword, but he is still a much better Omni Tank and a God Sword in general, and because of the Vantage effect, that is going to be making him a lot more unique, because he can combine this with many of the other slot B skills and function really well in Aether Raids offense, and it can be a pretty useful tech option. So even though this weapon refine doesn't really improve him insanely like Brave Marianne's, for example, it is still a pretty decent weapon refine in my opinion, because it does give him the extra stats which he needed for the modern times, and also the extra things like damage reduction and the tempo effect. Kind of wish that he got like lenient conditions and something a bit more meta influential like damage reduction piercing, but yeah, that is the Sword Infantry life, where there's going to be a lot of competition and it is not going to be decreasing in the future. You can still use Brave Marth with his base kit, but he definitely likes some upgrades like Time Pulse 4 so that he can loop his Shining Emblem, and a tier 4 damage reduction skill that can provide him the phantom speed and extra damage reduction. So if you did get him in the Hall of Forms, then you can just easily refine him and make use of these premium skills. You probably did get attack speed finish as well in the slot A, and after this weapon refine, he does have a lot more stats and he's able to function a lot better as a god sword. So he can just run distant pressure and just retaliate back against ranged enemies and take care of them. So this can definitely work out in many of the game modes. And if you're trying to upgrade him to the next level, then I think that this weapon refine really works well with Special Spiral 4 because it is going to be giving you that damage reduction, so you don't really have to choose between a damage reduction slot B skill or Special Spiral 4. So you still have damage reduction to fall back upon if you fail to kill something with the damage reduction piercing and Special Spiral 4, or if the enemy has got hardy bearing. So Special Spiral 4 does become a much better option now with this refine. And Special Spiral 4 is mainly useful for the damage reduction piercing and also the extra true damage that you can get. So distant attack speed solo is going to be the upgrade to distant pressure, as you don't really have any kind of chip damage, and you also get the extra attack, which is really helpful for functioning with the advantage in his weapon. And more merges are always going to be helping with these kinds of units, especially with the Omni tanks. And you can ascend the attack IV if you're going to be using him a lot with Special Spiral 4 and the advantage in his weapon. And for his slot C skill, you can try and run Sweet Smoke 4 if you want to get more damage reduction, or Panic Smoke 4 could also be a nice option for the foe penalty doubler effect. His other option is Null Counter Disrupt 4, which is going to be providing him with the damage reduction and also the ability to just attack against many of the healers that we see in Aether Raids offense, like Fallen Marias and Duels. So this is going to be really helpful, and you can actually still get the damage reduction piercing if you do support him with Legendary Female Aleer. Of course, this can only be done in the fire season in Aether Raids offense, but it is still worth mentioning because you're going to be missing out on the damage reduction piercing that you get from Special Spiral 4. So you have to choose between either going the damage reduction piercing route or attacking back to the opponents that have the fire sweep effect. So both of these options are useful in different matchups. The best case scenario is definitely using him with Legend Female Aleer, but that cannot always be done. But still, this is going to be a really good option that you can pick from. So you either stack damage reduction, you either pierce through the damage reduction, or you retaliate back against the healers and the fire sweep effects. And then you can also give him the new and shiny attack speed prime so that he can get even more attack and speed while also having distant counter. So this is something that you can do at like absolute max investment. And you can also just run Time Pulse 4, and Spurn 4 is going to be the best slot B skill for the damage reduction. And even if we get like Velocity 4, it doesn't really matter because he has the tempo effect in his weapon, the offensive half. So Spurn 4 is actually really helpful for the true damage that he can get while using the advantage from his weapon. And Time Pulse 4 is like the best slot C skill that you can have with Shining Emblem for looping it and for always having it ready. And then finally, if you do want to make use of a different special, then Godlike Reflexes is going to be the option, and now he can actually use Godlike Reflexes a lot better. So this is something that you can use for more damage reduction, and damage reduction that is not pierceable by Deadeye, Lethality, stuff like that. So you can loop Godlike Reflexes with using Attack Speed Pledge in his slot C, and even though the visible buff is a bit redundant on him, you can still get the Special Charges status and the extra offenses, which is much appreciated. And because of the half tempo effect in his weapon or the Null Guard effect, he has a much better time looping Godlike Reflexes now. So that is also another way of building him at like max investment and using him as an Omni tank. The Special Charges status from the Pledge skill does contribute towards the status effects that you need for having distant counter effect out of the Prime skill. So it is going to be a pretty amazing slot C skill, but really expensive. And you definitely want to support him with stuff like Asker, Garrick, who can just provide him with the extra status effect so that he can always have the distant counter from the Prime skill. Make sure to share this video with your friends, and I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, then make sure to leave a like and a comment, helps me tremendously. And if you really enjoyed, you could always support me directly by using super thanks down below or by becoming a YouTube member. And for more fave videos, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because YouTube sub boxes are about as functional as the damage reduction piercing, which I really wanted for Brave Eirika. So with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.